The bitter wind howled like a wounded animal as Faith Garrison pressed her face against the frost-rimmed window of her uncle's farmhouse, watching the first heavy flakes of snow begin to blanket the South Dakota landscape. Winter of 1879 had arrived with a vengeance in Hot Springs, and with it came a foreboding that settled deep in Faith's bones. At 22, she had endured 3 harsh winters under her uncle's roof, but something about this approaching storm filled her with dread. "Get away from that window, girl," barked Horace Garrison, her father's older brother and her reluctant guardian since her parents' deaths in '76. "You're letting the cold in." Faith stepped back, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "The storm's coming faster than folks predicted, Uncle," Mr. Henderson at the general store said. "I don't give a damn what Henderson said," Horace interrupted, taking a long swig from the bottle he'd been nursing all afternoon. "That fool doesn't know the difference between a flurry and a blizzard." Faith bit her tongue. Since moving to her uncle's homestead outside Hot Springs, she'd learned that contradicting him only invited trouble. Horace hadn't wanted the burden of his brother's daughter, but with no other family and nowhere else to go, Faith had little choice but to endure his bitter temperament and frequent drinking. "The horses need extra feed before the storm hits full force," Faith said quietly. "I'll tend to them now while there's still daylight." Horace grunted, his bloodshot eyes narrowing as he watched her gather her woolen shawl. "Be quick about it. No lollygagging in the barn with dreams of escaping. You've nowhere to go, girl. Remember that." Faith nodded, slipping out the door before he could say anything more cutting. The cold air bit at her cheeks as she made her way across the yard toward the large barn that housed their 4 horses and the milk cow. The structure had seen better days like everything on the Garrison property, but it was solid enough to withstand Dakota winters. As she pushed open the heavy wooden door, the familiar smells of hay and horse welcomed her. Here, at least, she found some peace. The animals didn't judge or belittle her. They didn't remind her daily that she was an unwanted burden. "Hello, Maple," Faith whispered to the chestnut mare who nickered softly in greeting. She ran her hand along the horse's neck. "Storm's coming. I need to make sure you're all comfortable for the night." She worked methodically, filling water troughs and distributing extra hay, talking softly to each animal in turn. Outside, the wind grew fiercer, and through the small window near the hayloft, Faith could see the snow falling more heavily now, blanketing the world in white. She was finishing her chores when the barn door flew open with a bang, sending a gust of icy air swirling through the space. Horace stood silhouetted against the whiteness, swaying slightly. "Uncle," Faith set down the pitchfork she'd been using. "I'm nearly done. You've been out here too long," he slurred, stomping inside and tracking snow across the packed earth floor. "What are you hiding in here, girl?" "Meeting someone." Faith shook her head, confusion knitting her brow. "No, Uncle. I'm just making sure the animals have enough for liar." The word exploded from him with such force that the horses shifted nervously in their stalls. "You're plotting something, I know it." "Just like your mother always scheming." Faith stepped back, recognizing the dangerous glint in his eyes. The bottle in his hand was nearly empty. "I'm not plotting anything. Please, let's go back to the house before the storm gets worse." Horace advanced on her, his breath sour with whiskey. "Your father was a fool to marry that woman, and I'm a bigger fool for taking in their scheming daughter." "Uncle, you're drunk," Faith said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Let's talk about this tomorrow." His hand shot out, gripping her arm painfully. "You think I don't see how you look at me, with the same judgment in your eyes as your father had? Well, I won't have it. You're hurting me," Faith gasped, trying to twist away from his grasp. Horace's face twisted with rage. You want to leave so badly, fine. See how you like a night in the cold. Before Faith could react, he dragged her toward the door of the storage room at the back of the barn, a small, windowless space where they kept tools and extra tack. No, Uncle, please. Faith struggled against him, but years of working the land had made Horace strong despite his age and drinking. The storm, you can listen to it howl all night, he growled, pushing her into the dark space. Maybe that'll teach you some gratitude. Faith stumbled into the room, falling against a stack of wooden crates. By the time she regained her footing, Horace had slammed the door shut. The distinctive sound of the heavy iron bolts sliding into place echoed in the small space. Uncle, Faith pounded on the door. You can't leave me in here. It's freezing. Enjoy your plotting, girl, Horace's muffled voice called back. I'll consider letting you out in the morning if I remember. Faith heard his uneven footsteps retreating, then the distant creak and slam of the barn door. Panic rose in her throat as darkness enveloped her. The storage room had no windows, no source of heat, and with the temperatures plummeting as the blizzard set in, spending the night here could mean death. Help, she cried, knowing it was futile with the storm's roar growing outside. Someone help me. She felt along the walls in the darkness, searching for anything that might help her escape. Her fingers found only rough wood and cold metal tools hanging from pegs. The door was solid oak, the bolt on the outside unreachable. As the minutes passed, the temperature in the small room seemed to drop rapidly. Faith huddled in the corner, wrapping her shawl tightly around herself, but the thin wool offered little protection against the bitter cold that seeped through the walls. Stay calm, she whispered to herself, teeth beginning to chatter. Someone will come. But who would venture out in a blizzard? The nearest neighbor was over a mile away. Uncle Horace wouldn't return until morning if then. Fear clutched at Faith's heart as the reality of her situation sank in. She could freeze to death in this room, becoming just another sad story whispered around hot springs. No. She refused to accept that fate. Faith rose to her feet, stomping and swinging her arms to keep her blood flowing. Then she returned to the door, pounding with all her might. Help! She screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. Is anyone there? Help me, please. Miles away, Samuel Lawson urged his exhausted horse through the worsening blizzard, cursing his own stubbornness. He should have stayed in town when the storekeeper warned him about the incoming storm. But Samuel wasn't a man who changed his plans easily. 3 years working cattle drives across the Dakota Territory had taught him to trust his own judgment above others, a trait that had kept him alive, if often alone. At 30, Samuel had seen enough of the country to know he wanted to settle somewhere and put down roots. He'd spent the day in Hot Springs inquiring about land for sale, determined to transform his cattle drive savings into something permanent. Now, that determination might cost him his life if he couldn't find shelter soon. The wind cut through his heavy coat like it was made of paper, and snow collected on his hat brim despite his frequent attempts to knock it away. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Buck, trudged forward with head lowered against the gale. Just a little further, boy, Samuel encouraged, though he wasn't entirely sure where they were heading. Visibility had dropped to almost nothing in the white-out conditions. Through a momentary break in the swirling snow, Samuel spotted a dark shape in the distance, a structure of some kind. Hope surged through him. He urged Buck toward it, praying it wasn't an abandoned outbuilding or, worse, a mirage born of desperation. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into a large barn. Beyond it, barely visible through the storm, stood what appeared to be a farmhouse. Light glowed faintly from one of its windows. Thank God, Samuel muttered, steering Buck toward the barn. He'd asked permission to wait out the storm, offer to pay for the inconvenience if necessary. Most folks in these parts understood the dangers of a Dakota blizzard and wouldn't turn away a traveler in need. As they approached the barn, Samuel thought he heard a sound different from the howling wind. He reined Buck to a stop, listening intently. There it was again, a human voice, faint but unmistakable, calling for help. Samuel dismounted, nearly losing his footing in the knee-deep snow. "Hello," he called out, his voice swallowed by the storm. "Is someone there?" The cry came again, more distinct now that he was closer to the barn. A woman's voice, desperate and frightened. Without hesitation, Samuel pushed through the snow toward the barn doors. They were secured with a simple latch, which he fumbled open with gloved hands. Buck followed him inside, both man and beast grateful for the sudden reprieve from the biting wind. "Hello," Samuel called again, louder now. "Where are you?" "Here." The voice was clearer now, coming from the back of the barn. "I'm locked in the storage room. Please help me." Samuel moved quickly past the nervous horses in their stalls, following the voice to a heavy door with an iron bolt securing it from the outside. "Stand back from the door," he called. "I'm going to open it." He slid the bolt back and pulled the door open. In the dim light filtering through the barn windows, he saw a young woman huddled in the corner of the small room, her face pale with cold and fear, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Thank God," she breathed, relief washing over her features as she unsteadily rose to her feet. "Are you hurt?" Samuel asked, instinctively reaching out to support her as she swayed slightly. "Just cold," she replied, her teeth chattering. "Very cold. My uncle, he locked me in here. He was drunk and angry." Samuel felt a surge of anger at her words but focused on the immediate need. "Let's get you warmed up. Is that your house I saw? We should get you inside." "No." The fear returned to her eyes. "He's there. He'll be furious if he sees me, and you. He doesn't like strangers." Samuel nodded, quickly assessing their options. "All right. We'll stay in the barn for now. It's not warm, but it's out of the wind, and I've got supplies on my horse." He guided her to a pile of hay near the horse's stalls, where the animal's body heat provided some warmth. Then he retrieved his saddlebags from Buck, pulling out a thick wool blanket. "Wrap yourself in this," he said, draping it around her shoulders. "I'm Samuel Lawson, by the way. I was heading back to my camp when the storm caught me." "Faith Garrison," she replied, clutching the blanket gratefully. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Lawson. I don't think I would have survived the night in that room." Samuel crouched beside her, studying her face in the dimness. Despite the cold that had left her cheeks pale, he could see she was beautiful, with delicate features and expressive eyes that reflected both strength and vulnerability. "No one should be treated that way," he said quietly, "especially not by family." Faith looked down, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "My uncle, he wasn't always this way. After my parents died, he took me in, but the responsibility embittered him. The drinking makes it worse." Samuel nodded, understanding more than she knew. His own father had sought solace in whiskey after his mother died, turning a once kind man into someone unrecognizable. "You have somewhere else you can go?" he asked. "Other family, friends?" Faith shook her head. "No one close enough to matter. I've been saving to leave to make my own way, but it's slow going." She looked up at him suddenly. "What about you? You'll freeze if you try to continue in this storm." Samuel smiled at her concern, surprised that even in her own predicament she worried for a stranger. "I've weathered worse. Though I won't say no to sharing your barn until morning, if that's all right." "Of course," Faith said. "It's the least I can offer after you came to my rescue." As if in response to their words, the wind outside intensified, rattling the barn walls and sending a draft whistling through the cracks. Faith shivered despite the blanket. "We need to build up more warmth," Samuel said decisively. He looked around the barn, spotting a small metal stove in one corner, likely used for heating water or tools during the winter months. Is there any firewood in here? Faith nodded toward a stack of split logs near the door. Uncle keeps some in here for emergencies. This certainly qualifies, Samuel said, moving to gather an armful of logs. He checked the stove, found it clean enough, and set about building a small fire, working with the efficiency of a man accustomed to making camp in difficult conditions. Faith watched him, struck by the confident way he moved and the kindness in his weathered face. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness she hadn't experienced in a long time. Soon, a small fire crackled in the stove, radiating precious heat into the surrounding area. Samuel had positioned it carefully, ensuring it was safe from the hay while still close enough to warm them. "That's better," he said, returning to sit beside Faith. "Are you hungry? I've got some jerky and hardtack in my bags." Faith realized suddenly that she hadn't eaten since morning. "Yes, thank you. I'd be grateful for anything." Samuel retrieved the food along with a small tin canteen of water. They shared the simple meal in companionable silence, listening to the storm rage outside and the occasional soft sounds from the horses. "How long have you been in Hot Springs?" Faith asked eventually, curiosity overcoming her usual reserve. "Just passing through, actually," Samuel replied. "I've been working cattle drives for a few years, saving up. I came to town to look at land." Faith's eyes widened with interest. "You're looking to settle here?" Samuel nodded, surprised at how easily he found himself talking to this woman he'd just met. "I've seen enough of wandering. Time to build something that lasts." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I didn't expect to get caught in a blizzard and end up rescuing a damsel in distress." Faith laughed softly, the sound warming the space between them more effectively than the stove. "I'm hardly a damsel, Mr. Lawson, and I suspect you're the type of man who would stop for anyone in trouble." "Samuel, please," he corrected, "and you might be right about that. My mother always said I had more heart than sense." "She sounds wise," Faith said. "My mother used to say something similar about my father. All compassion, no caution, she'd tell him." "Your parents," Samuel ventured carefully, "have they been gone long?" Faith's smile faded slightly. 3 years now. Influenza took them both within days of each other. I came to live with Uncle Horace afterward." She gazed at the stove's flickering light. "They were good people, kind, nothing like." She trailed off, but Samuel understood. "It's hard to lose that kind of love," he said softly. "Makes the world seem colder somehow." Faith looked up at him, struck by how perfectly he'd articulated her feelings. "Yes, exactly that. Have you lost someone too?" Samuel nodded. "My mother when I was 12. Father followed her a few years later, though the whiskey took him long before his heart finally gave out." They fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, one filled with recognition and shared understanding. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, but inside the barn, beside the small stove, something warm and unexpected was beginning to take root. As the night deepened, Faith found herself telling Samuel more about her life than she'd shared with anyone in years. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her parents' small farm, about the dreams she still harbored of having a place of her own someday. In turn, Samuel spoke of his years driving cattle, of the characters he'd met on the trail, of lonely nights under vast starlit skies, and of his determination to create something permanent after a lifetime of transience. "I've saved nearly enough for a decent parcel," he said. "Nothing fancy, but good land with water rights, enough to run a small herd and maybe grow something too." "It sounds wonderful," Faith said sincerely. "To build something from nothing, that's a powerful thing." Samuel studied her face in the warm glow of the stove light. "What about you? What would you do if you could do anything?" Faith hesitated, unused to being asked about her desires. "I'd like a little house with a garden," she said finally. "Somewhere I could grow herbs and flowers, maybe raise chickens and a cow." She smiled self-consciously. "Simple dreams, I suppose." "The best kind," Samuel replied. "Simple dreams tend to last." A particularly violent gust rattled the barn, making them both glance toward the walls. The blizzard showed no signs of abating. "We should try to get some sleep," Samuel suggested. "Morning will come whether we're rested or not." He helped Faith arrange a bed of hay, positioned to catch the warmth from the stove while remaining safe from any stray sparks. Then he created his own makeshift bed, a respectful distance away. "I'll keep the fire going through the night," he assured her as she settled under his blanket. "Thank you, Samuel," Faith said softly. "Not just for the fire, for everything." He nodded, surprised by the swell of protectiveness he felt toward this woman he'd known for mere hours. "Get some rest, Faith." Despite her exhaustion, Faith found sleep elusive. Her mind kept replaying the evening's events, the terror of being locked in the storage room, the miraculous appearance of Samuel, and the unexpected ease she felt in his company. Across the hay-strewn floor, she could see his outline as he periodically rose to add wood to the stove, his movements quiet and considerate. There was something about him, a fundamental decency that radiated from him as surely as heat from the stove. In her 3 years with Uncle Horace, Faith had forgotten what it felt like to be treated with such simple kindness. Eventually, lulled by the warmth and the steady sounds of the horses, Faith drifted into sleep. She woke to pale light filtering through the barn windows and the lingering warmth of the stove, which Samuel had faithfully maintained throughout the night. He was already up, tending to his horse and checking on the other animals. "Good morning," he said, when he noticed her stirring. "The storm's passed, but we've got quite a snowdrift to contend with." Faith sat up, brushing hay from her hair. "How bad is it?" 2, maybe 3 feet deep around the barn," Samuel replied. "The door's partially blocked, but I can clear it. How are you feeling?" "Better," Faith said, realizing it was true. The desperate fear of the previous night had receded, replaced by a cautious sense of possibility. "What time do you think it is?" Samuel glanced at the light. "Mid-morning, I'd guess. Your uncle." Faith's stomach tightened at the reminder. "He might still be asleep. The drinking often keeps him in bed late." Samuel's expression darkened. "Faith, you can't stay here, not after what he did. He could have killed you." "I know," she said quietly. "But where would I go? Hot Springs is miles away, and I have barely any money saved." Samuel hesitated, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he said, "Come with me to town. We'll figure something out from there. Maybe there's work at the hotel or one of the shops." Hope flared within Faith, bright and unexpected. "You'd help me like that? You barely know me." "I know enough," Samuel said simply. "I know you deserve better than fearing for your life under your own roof." Faith looked down at her hands, calloused from farm work and chapped from the cold. Could she really leave? Start over? The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I would need to get some things from the house," she said slowly. "And I should leave a note. For all his faults, he is my only family. I don't want him to think I've been taken or killed." Samuel nodded, respecting her decision. "I'll clear the snow from the barn door and get Buck ready. You get what you need from the house, but be quick. And Faith," he met her eyes steadily, "if your uncle is awake and hostile, you come straight back here. We'll find another way." Faith nodded, grateful for his understanding. She folded his blanket carefully and handed it back to him, then slipped out of the barn into the blindingly white world outside. The storm had transformed the landscape into something almost unrecognizable. Snow blanketed everything, smoothing the rough edges of the farm into gentle curves and drifts. The path to the house was nearly invisible, but Faith knew it by heart. She approached the farmhouse cautiously, listening for any sounds from within. Hearing nothing, she gently pushed open the door and stepped inside. The front room was cold and still, the fire having died out overnight. Empty bottles littered the table, evidence of how her uncle had spent the evening. Moving quietly, Faith made her way to her small bedroom at the back of the house. She pulled her carpet bag from under the bed and quickly filled it with her meager possessions: 2 dresses, undergarments, a pair of sturdy boots, the locket containing miniature portraits of her parents, and the small pouch of money she'd managed to save from occasional work in town. In the kitchen, she found paper and pencil to write a brief note. "Uncle Horace, I am leaving to make my own way. What happened last night cannot happen again. I bear you no ill will and pray you find peace." Faith, she placed the note prominently on the table, then hesitated, listening again for any sound from her uncle's room. Hearing nothing, she took a deep breath, gathered her courage and slipped out of the house, closing the door softly behind her. Samuel had cleared a path from the barn door and was adjusting Buck's saddle when Faith returned, her carpet bag clutched tightly in one hand. "All clear?" he asked, studying her face. Faith nodded. "He's still asleep. Did you manage to feed the animals? They shouldn't suffer because I'm leaving." "All taken care of," Samuel assured her. "I gave them extra hay and filled the water troughs." He gestured to Buck. "He's strong enough to carry us both to town, though it'll be slow going in this snow." Faith approached the horse, running a gentle hand down his neck. "He's beautiful. I've always loved buckskins." "He's been a good partner," Samuel agreed, patting the horse's flank. "Stubborn as the day is long, but loyal when it counts." He secured Faith's carpet bag to the saddle, then turned to her. "Ready?" Faith took one last look at the farmhouse, her home for the past 3 years. Despite everything, a pang of sadness touched her heart. This wasn't how she had imagined leaving, fleeing after being locked in a barn, but perhaps it was the push she had needed to finally pursue her own path. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm ready." Samuel helped her mount Buck, then swung up behind her. The close proximity sent a flutter through Faith's stomach, but she told herself it was merely excitement about her sudden change in circumstances, not the warmth of his chest against her back, or the steady way his arms reached around her to hold the reins. They set off slowly through the deep snow, Buck picking his way carefully across the white landscape. The sky above was brilliantly clear, the storm having swept away to reveal a pristine blue expanse. The cold was intense, but somehow cleaner than the damp chill of the storage room had been. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Faith remarked, gazing at the transformed world around them. "Even after all the danger it brought." "Nature doesn't concern itself with our troubles," Samuel replied, his voice close to her ear. "It's both its cruelty and its mercy, I suppose." They rode in companionable silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. Faith found her mind racing ahead to Hot Springs, wondering what awaited her there. Would she find work, a place to stay? Would she ever see Samuel again after he helped her get settled? The thought of parting ways with him brought an unexpected ache. In the span of one night, this stranger had become important to her in a way she couldn't quite define. "Samuel," she said suddenly, "what will you do once we reach town?" She felt him shift slightly behind her. "Continue looking at land, I suppose. There's a parcel west of town that seemed promising." Faith nodded, unsure why his straightforward answer disappointed her. What had she expected? That he would abandon his plans because of her and you, he asked. "Will you stay in Hot Springs?" "I don't know," Faith admitted. "I hadn't planned to leave so suddenly. I need work and a place to stay that I can afford." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then said, "The Henderson Hotel was looking for help last I heard. The owner's wife mentioned needing someone for cleaning and laundry." "That would be a start," Faith said gratefully. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "I can see that," Samuel replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. The journey to Hot Springs took most of the morning, with Buck struggling through the deep snow and occasional drifts. By the time the small town came into view, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a main street. Smoke rising from chimneys into the clear sky. Faith's legs were numb from the cold and the unfamiliar position of riding. The town was quieter than usual, many residents likely still snowed in at their homes. A few men were clearing paths along the main street, pausing to wave or nod as Samuel guided Buck toward the Henderson Hotel, a two-story wooden structure that served as both lodging and one of the town's few restaurants. "Let me do the talking at first," Samuel suggested as they dismounted in front of the hotel. "Mrs. Henderson can be particular about who she hires." Faith nodded, suddenly nervous. Everything was happening so quickly. Yesterday morning, she had been resigned to another winter under her uncle's roof. Now she stood in town with all her possessions in one small bag, about to ask for a job and lodging from strangers. Samuel seemed to sense her anxiety. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It'll be all right, Faith. You're not alone in this." The simple statement steadied her. She took a deep breath and followed Samuel into the hotel. The lobby was warm and welcoming after the bitter cold outside. A fire blazed in a stone hearth, and the smell of coffee and baking bread wafted from the adjacent dining room. A plump, gray-haired woman looked up from behind a polished wooden counter. "Mr. Lawson," she exclaimed, "we wondered if you'd made it to safety before the blizzard hit." Mr. Henderson said only a fool would try to outrun that storm. Her eyes shifted to Faith, curiosity evident in her gaze. "Mrs. Henderson," Samuel greeted her with a tip of his hat. "I very nearly proved your husband right, but fortune favored me. May I introduce Miss Faith Garrison? She's looking for work in town, and I recalled you mentioning a need for help with the rooms and laundry." Mrs. Henderson's shrewd eyes assessed Faith, taking in her simple dress and resolute posture. "Indeed I did. Lost my last girl to marriage last month." She addressed Faith directly. "You have experience with cleaning work, Miss Garrison?" Faith stepped forward confidently. "Yes, madam. I've managed a household since I was 16, and I'm no stranger to hard work. I'm also handy with a needle if mending is needed." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "Well, that's promising. Room and board would be included, of course, along with a small wage. The work isn't glamorous, changing linens, sweeping floors, helping with laundry, that sort of thing." "That would suit me perfectly, madam," Faith said earnestly. "And your previous situation, Mrs. Henderson asked?" "I don't mean to pry, but Hot Springs is a small town. People talk." Faith hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Samuel stepped in smoothly. "Miss Garrison has been caring for an ailing relative who, unfortunately, has become difficult to manage. She's seeking a fresh start." Mrs. Henderson nodded, seeming satisfied with this partial truth. "Very well. I can offer you a trial period of 2 weeks. If we suit each other, we can make a more permanent arrangement." Relief washed over Faith. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I won't disappoint you." "See that you don't," the older woman replied, though her tone held no real sternness. "You can start tomorrow. I'll have Betsy show you to the staff quarters later." She turned back to Samuel. "Will you be staying with us again, Mr. Lawson?" Samuel nodded. "For a few more days at least." "I'm still looking at property in the area." "Your usual room is available," Mrs. Henderson said. "I'll have hot water sent up for both of you. You look half frozen." She gestured toward the dining room. There's stew on the stove if you're hungry." "Much obliged," Samuel said with another tip of his hat. As Mrs. Henderson bustled away to arrange things, Faith turned to Samuel, her eyes bright with gratitude and unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Samuel shook his head. "There's nothing to repay. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Faith said firmly. "Not anyone. What you did breaking into a stranger's barn during a blizzard because you heard someone calling for help, that's not something everyone would do. You saved my life, Samuel, and now you've helped me find work and a place to stay." A flush crept up his neck at her praise. "Let's get some of that stew," he suggested, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You must be starving after our ride." They settled at a table in the corner of the dining room, grateful for the hot food and coffee. As they ate, Samuel told Faith more about the land he was considering purchasing. "It's about 5 miles west of town," he explained. 160 acres with a creek running through the eastern section, good grazing land and enough flat terrain for some crops. His eyes lit up as he described it. "The cabin's small and needs work, but it's a solid start." Faith found herself captivated by his enthusiasm. "It sounds wonderful. When do you decide?" "I'm meeting with the current owner tomorrow to make an offer," Samuel replied. "If all goes well, I could be a landowner by week's end." He smiled ruefully. "Though there's a mountain of work ahead before it's truly a ranch." "All worthwhile things require effort," Faith said. "My father used to say that." Samuel studied her across the table, his expression thoughtful. "Your father sounds like a wise man. I wish I could have met him." The simple statement touched Faith deeply. "He would have liked you," she said softly. "He valued honesty and kindness above all else." They fell into an easy conversation, discussing their hopes for the future and sharing stories from their pasts. Faith found herself laughing more than she had in years, drawn to Samuel's quiet humor and the way he listened so intently to everything she said. As afternoon faded toward evening, Mrs. Henderson returned to show Faith to the small room that would be hers, a clean, simple space with a narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers. "It's not fancy," Mrs. Henderson apologized, "but it's warm and private." "It's perfect," Faith assured her, thinking of the cramped, cold room she'd occupied at her uncle's farm. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mrs. Henderson." The older woman nodded, her expression softening further. "Mr. Lawson speaks highly of you, and I've found him to be a good judge of character. Rest tonight, and we'll start fresh in the morning." After Mrs. Henderson left, Faith sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by how dramatically her life had changed in just 24 hours. From the terror of being locked in the barn to finding employment and lodging in town, it seemed almost dreamlike. A gentle knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Samuel standing there, hat in hand. "I wanted to check that you're settling in all right," he said. Faith smiled. "Yes, thank you, it's more than I could have hoped for." Samuel nodded, seeming oddly hesitant. "Good. That's good." He paused, then added, "I was thinking if you're not too tired, perhaps you join me for dinner in the dining room to celebrate your new position." Faith felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her changed circumstances. "I'd like that very much." They dined together that evening, and the next after that. Samuel's meeting with the landowner went well, and by the end of the week, he was indeed the owner of the property he described so enthusiastically to Faith. During those days, Faith threw herself into her new duties at the hotel. The work was hard but satisfying, and Mrs. Henderson proved to be a fair, if exacting, employer. In the evenings, Faith would meet Samuel, and they would share their days over dinner. It was on the fourth night, as they sat by the fire in the hotel's sitting room after dinner, that Samuel broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "I ride out to the property tomorrow," he said, watching the flames dance in the hearth. "There's much to be done before spring if I'm to have any hope of a successful first year." Faith nodded, feeling a now familiar twinge at the thought of his departure. In less than a week, he had become the person she most looked forward to seeing each day. "You'll need to repair the cabin before anything else, won't you?" "Among other things," Samuel agreed. "Fences need mending, fields need clearing." He hesitated, then turned to face her directly. "Faith, I know this may seem sudden, but these past days have been. I've never met anyone quite like you." Faith's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. "Nor I you," she admitted softly. Samuel took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "I don't have much to offer yet. The cabin is small, the work will be hard, and success is far from guaranteed, but if you, that is, would you consider—" He paused, frustrated with his own stammering, then tried again. "Faith, would you consider coming with me to the ranch, not as a worker or helper, but as what?" Faith whispered, though her heart already knew what he was asking. "As my wife," Samuel finished, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it's fast, perhaps too fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Faith Garrison. I think I began falling for you that first night in the barn when you showed such courage in the face of cruelty." Faith sat stunned, joy and disbelief warring within her. "Samuel, we barely know each other." "I know enough," he said, echoing his words from days before. "I know you're kind and brave and hardworking. I know you make me laugh and think and want to be better. I know that when I imagine my life on that ranch, I can't picture it without you there." Tears welled in Faith's eyes. "I have nothing to bring to a marriage," she said. "No dowry, no family connections, just myself and a carpet bag of belongings." Samuel reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "That's all I want, just you, Faith. The rest we'll build together." Faith looked into his earnest face, this man who had rescued her from more than just the cold. In him, she saw not only safety and security but partnership and possibility. In less than a week, he had shown her more respect and kindness than she had known in years. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain despite her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Lawson." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with a reverence that made her breath catch. "Tomorrow," he said. "We can speak to Reverend Mitchell tomorrow, unless you want to wait. Have a proper courtship." Faith shook her head, smiling through her tears. "I think we're past the need for conventional courtship, don't you? After all, you've already seen me in my night clothes, sleeping on hay." Samuel laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "That I have." The next morning they stood before Reverend Mitchell in the small white church at the edge of town. Mrs. Henderson and her husband served as witnesses, the older woman surprisingly teary-eyed for someone who had known Faith less than a week. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. When Samuel placed a plain gold band on Faith's finger purchased that morning from the town's jeweler and promised to cherish her all the days of his life, Faith felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Mitchell declared. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Lawson." Samuel's kiss was gentle yet profound, a promise sealed with tenderness. When they parted, Faith saw in his eyes all the future they would build together. They left Hot Springs that afternoon, Faith's belongings and some supplies from town loaded onto a wagon Samuel had purchased along with his land. Buck pulled the wagon steadily westward as the newlyweds sat side by side on the wooden seat. "Are you nervous?" Samuel asked as the town receded behind them. Faith considered the question honestly. "A little," she admitted. "Everything has happened so quickly, but not nervous in the way you might think." She smiled at him. "I'm not afraid of the work or the challenges. I'm just in awe of how life can change so completely in the space of a week." Samuel's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "We'll take it one day at a time, together." The journey to their new home took several hours. As they crested a hill, Samuel pointed ahead. "There it is." Faith followed his gesture and saw a small cabin nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. A creek glinted in the distance, and open grassland stretched in every direction. It was wild and beautiful and utterly different from anything she had known before. "Our home," she murmured, the words filling her with wonder. Samuel smiled at the awe in her voice. "It needs work," he cautioned. "The roof leaks in the corner and the porch steps are rotting, but it's ours, Faith, every inch of it." They approached slowly, taking in the details of their property. The cabin was indeed small and weathered, but Faith could see its potential immediately. A massive oak tree provided shade at the western side, and the small cleared area around the structure would be perfect for a garden come spring. Samuel helped Faith down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed, looping her arms around his neck. "Carrying my wife over the threshold," he replied seriously. "It's tradition." He carried her up the worn steps and across the porch to the cabin door, which he managed to push open with his foot. Inside was simple but clean: a main room with a stone fireplace, a small table and chairs, and a bed in one corner. A doorway led to what appeared to be a storage area at the back. Samuel set Faith gently on her feet, suddenly looking uncertain. "I know it's not much compared to what you might have dreamed of." Faith silenced him with a kiss, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. When she pulled back, she smiled at his surprised expression. "It's perfect, Samuel. It's the beginning of our story." Relief and love washed over his features. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I'll make you happy, Faith, I swear it." "You already have," she whispered. "More than I ever thought possible." That first night in their new home, they sat before a crackling fire, planning all they would accomplish in the coming months. Faith spoke of the garden she would plant, the curtains she would sew, the bread she would bake in the small cast iron stove. Samuel described the cattle he would purchase, the fields he would plow, the barn he would build. Later, as the fire burned low, they came together as husband and wife for the first time, discovering each other with tender reverence. In Samuel's gentle touch, Faith found healing for wounds she hadn't known she carried. In Faith's loving embrace, Samuel found the home he had sought across countless miles. The winter passed in a blur of hard work and sweet discoveries. They repaired the cabin together, Faith proving as adept with a hammer as with a needle, and prepared for spring planting. Samuel constructed sturdy fences and traveled to nearby ranches to make connections and learn from more experienced cattlemen. By the time the first wildflowers bloomed on the hillsides, their little cabin had transformed into a true home. Curtains Faith had sewn from fabric purchased in town hung at the windows. Shelves Samuel had built lined one wall, holding books and the few treasured possessions they had between them. Outside, Faith had marked out her garden plot and started seedlings in small pots that crowded the windowsills. On a warm afternoon in late April, as Faith hung laundry on the line Samuel had strung between the cabin and the oak tree, she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of Hot Springs. Shading her eyes against the sun, she recognized the stocky figure of Sheriff Donovan, the town's law enforcement. "Samuel," she called toward the barn where her husband was repairing a harness. "We have company." Samuel emerged, wiping his hands on a rag, and joined Faith in the yard as the sheriff approached. They had met the lawman several times in town and found him to be fair-minded and direct. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Samuel greeted him. "What brings you all the way out here?" Sheriff Donovan dismounted, removing his hat respectfully as he addressed Faith. "Madam, Mr. Lawson." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'm afraid I bring somewhat troubling news." Faith felt a chill despite the warm sunshine. "What is it?" "It's regarding your uncle, Mrs. Lawson." "Horace Garrison." The sheriff shifted his weight. "There was an incident in town yesterday. He came in looking for you, seemed quite agitated. Started making accusations at the hotel, saying someone had kidnapped his niece." Faith paled and Samuel moved protectively to her side. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight. "Mrs. Henderson set him straight right quick," the sheriff continued. "Told him you'd left of your own accord and were now properly married. He didn't take it well. Started making threats, saying he was going to find you and bring you back where you belonged." "He has no right," Samuel said firmly. "Faith is my wife." "Indeed she is," the sheriff agreed. "Which is exactly what I explained to Mr. Garrison when I removed him from the hotel. I suggested he return home and accept that his niece is grown and has made her choice." He hesitated. "But I thought you should know he was quite determined and quite drunk." Faith twisted her hands in her apron. "Thank you for telling us, Sheriff." "I don't expect he'll cause real trouble," Donovan added, "but it might be wise to be vigilant for a time. If he does appear out here, send word to town immediately." After the sheriff departed, Faith sat heavily on the porch steps, her face troubled. Samuel joined her, taking her hand in his. "He won't hurt you again," he promised. "I won't let him." Faith nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. "I know, it's just, I had hoped that chapter of my life was closed." "It is," Samuel assured her. "Your uncle is just having trouble accepting it. He'll come to understand eventually." The days passed with no sign of Horace Garrison. Spring bloomed fully into early summer. Faith's garden flourished, producing vegetables that she carefully preserved for the coming winter. Samuel acquired his first small herd of cattle, just 20 head, but a start toward his dream of a successful ranch. One golden evening in June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Faith turned to Samuel with nervous excitement in her eyes. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice soft but steady. Samuel looked at her expectantly. "What is it?" Faith took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Samuel. Come winter, there will be 3 of us in this cabin." The joy that transformed his face was unlike anything Faith had ever seen. Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." Faith nodded, her own tears of happiness mingling with his. "Are you pleased?" Samuel drew back just enough to look into her eyes. "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it. Faith, you've given me everything I never dared hope for: a home, a partner, and now a child. How could I be anything but overjoyed?" The summer progressed with Faith's body slowly changing to accommodate their growing child. Samuel became even more protective, insisting she rest frequently and taking on additional chores to spare her exertion. Faith tolerated his fussing with amused patience, knowing it stemmed from love. By August, their ranch had taken on a more established appearance. A small barn stood beside the cabin, housing their 2 milk cows and the work horses Samuel had purchased to help with plowing. The cattle grazed contentedly in the pastures, and the garden produced bountifully under Faith's careful tending. It was during the heat of late August that their peaceful existence was shattered. Faith was alone at the cabin, Samuel having ridden to a neighboring ranch to help with a difficult calving. She was preparing dinner, humming softly to herself, and occasionally resting a hand on her now visible pregnancy, when the sound of approaching hooves drew her attention. Through the window, she saw her uncle's wagon coming up the lane. Fear clutched at her heart, but she steeled herself. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment she had left his farm. Taking a deep breath, Faith stepped onto the porch as the wagon came to a stop in the yard. Horace Garrison sat slumped on the seat, his expression a mixture of anger and something Faith couldn't quite identify, perhaps regret. "Uncle Horace," she said calmly, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Her uncle stared at her for a long moment, his gaze lingering on her pregnant form. Then he slowly climbed down from the wagon, moving with the stiffness of age and hard living. "So it's true," he said, his voice rougher than she remembered. "You got yourself married." Faith lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, this is my home now with my husband." Horace took a few steps toward the porch, then stopped, seeming unsure of his reception. "I've been looking for you since spring. No one would tell me where you'd gone. Had to hear it from some cowhand passing through, said he'd done business with a Lawson west of town." "What do you want, Uncle?" Faith asked directly. She wouldn't invite him inside, not without Samuel present, but neither would she show fear. Horace's weathered face contorted with emotions Faith couldn't read. "Wanted to see for myself that you were all right, that you hadn't been taken against your will." Faith almost laughed at the irony. "As opposed to being locked in a barn during a blizzard, that wasn't against my will." Horace flinched, genuine shame crossing his features. "I was drunk, wasn't thinking straight. You could have killed me," Faith said quietly. "I know that now," he admitted, surprising her. "When you didn't come back, when I found that note, I realized what I'd done." He looked away. "Been sober since that day, cold realization of what might have happened. It shook something loose in me." Faith studied him, noticing for the first time the changes in his appearance. He did look more clear-eyed than she remembered, his clothing neater, his posture straighter despite his age. "I'm glad to hear that," she said cautiously. "Truly?" Horace nodded, scuffing his boot in the dirt. "Your husband, he treat you right?" "Better than I ever dreamed possible," Faith replied honestly. A sad smile touched her uncle's lips. "Good. That's good." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "I brought something from your mother's things. Found it when I was clearing out some old trunks." He returned to the wagon and retrieved a small wooden box which he carried carefully to the porch steps. "It's her jewelry. Not much and nothing valuable, but I thought might be something you'd want for the baby, if it's a girl." Faith was stunned by the gesture. She accepted the box, opening it to find a few simple pieces: a cameo brooch, a pair of pearl earrings, a silver locket similar to the one she already possessed. "Thank you," she said softly, genuinely touched. "This means a great deal to me." Horace nodded awkwardly. "Well, I should get back. Long ride to town. Would you like some water before you go?" Faith offered, surprising herself. "For you and the horse." Something like hope flickered in her uncle's eyes. "That would be welcome." Faith brought a dipper of cool water from the well for her uncle and a bucket for his horse. As he drank, she noticed the tremor in his hands, not from liquor but from age and hard work. "The farm?" she asked. "How is it managing?" he replied. "Hired a local boy to help with the heavier work. Gets lonely, though." He handed the dipper back to her. "Your husband due back soon?" Faith nodded. "Before sunset." Horace seemed to understand her unspoken meaning. He wouldn't be welcome to stay until Samuel returned. "I'll be on my way then. Just wanted to see that you were well, and to say, I'm sorry, Faith, for everything. Your father would have been ashamed of how I treated his daughter." The simple apology, so unexpected and so clearly genuine, brought tears to Faith's eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Uncle Horace." He climbed back onto his wagon seat, gathering the reins. "Maybe. Would it be all right if I visited sometimes? To see the baby when it comes. I'm its only blood kin besides you." Faith considered the request, weighing her past pain against the changed man before her. "I'll speak with Samuel," she said finally. "But yes, I think that would be all right. If you continue to stay sober." Horace's face lightened with relief. "I will. You have my word." As her uncle's wagon disappeared down the lane, Faith sat on the porch step, the box of jewelry in her lap, feeling as though a weight she hadn't known she was carrying had been lifted. The pain of those years in her uncle's home would never completely fade, but forgiveness, she realized, was its own kind of freedom. When Samuel returned home and she told him of her uncle's visit, she was once again reminded of why she loved him. Instead of anger or possessive protectiveness, he listened carefully to her account, particularly her uncle's apparent transformation. "You believe he's changed?" Samuel asked when she had finished. Faith considered the question seriously. "I think he's trying to change. And I think having some connection to the baby, to family, might help him continue on that path." Samuel nodded, respecting her judgment. "Then we'll give him that chance." "But Faith," he took her hands in his, "if at any point you feel uncomfortable with his presence, or if he shows any sign of returning to his old ways, that's the end of it. Your safety and our child's comes first." Faith leaned into his embrace, grateful beyond words for this man who understood that healing sometimes required extending grace to those who had hurt you. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "More every day." As autumn painted the hills in golds and reds, Faith and Samuel prepared for winter and for their child's arrival. The harvest was bountiful, the root cellar stocked with preserves and vegetables. Samuel split and stacked firewood until the pile stood taller than he did, determined that his wife and coming child would never know the cold as Faith had in that barn less than a year before. Horace visited twice during those months, each time bringing some small gift, a handcrafted wooden cradle he admitted to making himself, a soft blanket he'd purchased in town. Each visit was somewhat awkward but increasingly peaceful, as though the simple act of acknowledging past wrongs had opened the possibility for something new to grow. Winter arrived with the same ferocity as the previous year, but this time Faith faced it with joy rather than dread. The cabin was warm and secure, the pantry well stocked, and Samuel by her side every night. It was during the season's first major snowfall, almost exactly a year after that fateful blizzard, that Faith felt the first pains of labor. Samuel rode through the storm to fetch the midwife from town, returning with both the midwife and, surprisingly, Mrs. Henderson, who declared she wouldn't miss the birth of her matchmaking success for anything. After hours of labor that tested Faith's endurance to its limits, their son was born as dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape. Samuel wept openly as the midwife placed the squalling infant in his arms, his face a portrait of wonder and love. "He's perfect," he whispered, bringing the baby to Faith's side. "Look what we've made, my love." Faith, exhausted but radiant, reached out to touch their son's tiny hand. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." They named him David Thomas Lawson, David for Faith's father, and Thomas for the grandfather Samuel had admired most. He had Samuel's dark hair and Faith's clear blue eyes, a combination that both agreed made for the most beautiful baby ever born. As winter deepened, their little family settled into a rhythm centered around David's needs. Faith recovered her strength gradually, supported by Samuel's constant care and Mrs. Henderson's occasional visits to help with the baby and household tasks. Even Horace came to see his great-nephew, arriving one clear January day with a hand-carved wooden horse as a gift. When Samuel carefully placed David in the older man's arms, Faith saw tears in her uncle's eyes, perhaps the first he had shed in decades. "He has your mother's look about him," Horace said gruffly, gently touching the baby's cheek. "She would have been proud, Faith, of all of this." Faith, watching her uncle cradle her son with trembling hands, felt the last shard of bitterness in her heart dissolve. "I think she would have been proud of both of us, Uncle, for finding our way forward." By spring, David was growing strong, his personality emerging in gummy smiles and determined kicks. The ranch prospered alongside him, with new calves born and fields planted for the coming season. Samuel and Faith expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for themselves and a small nursery for David. On the anniversary of their wedding, Samuel surprised Faith with a special dinner after David had been put to bed. By candlelight, they shared a meal of venison and vegetables from the first spring harvest of their garden. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Lawson," Samuel said, raising his cup in a toast. "1 year together, and I find I love you more today than when we spoke our vows." Faith smiled, her eyes shining in the candlelight. "It seems impossible that only a year has passed since that day in Reverend Mitchell's church. So much has changed." "For the better?" Samuel asked, though he knew the answer. "Beyond my wildest dreams," Faith confirmed. She reached across the table to take his hand. "Do you remember that first night in the barn, when you asked me what I would do if I could do anything?" Samuel nodded, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "You wanted a little house with a garden, chickens, and a cow." Faith laughed softly. "Such modest dreams they seemed then. And now look at us, we have all that and so much more." Her expression grew thoughtful. "That night in the barn, as terrible as it was to be locked in that room, brought me to you. Sometimes I think about how differently life might have gone if you hadn't heard me calling for help. I believe we would have found each other somehow," Samuel said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Faith. You and me, we're one of those things." Faith rose from her chair and moved around the table to sit in his lap, something she had never done before. Samuel's arms came around her automatically, holding her close. "I think you're right," she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. "From strangers to spouses in a week, and now parents with a thriving ranch. Who could have predicted such a journey?" "It's only the beginning," Samuel promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We have a lifetime ahead of us, Faith, a lifetime of building and growing together." As they sat there in the warm circle of candlelight, Faith thought of all they had overcome and all they had created. From a night of terror in a snowbound barn to this moment of perfect contentment, it was a journey she would never have chosen but could never regret. Outside, the spring wind whispered through the new leaves of the oak tree. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, and their son slept peacefully in his cradle. Faith turned in Samuel's arms to kiss him properly, pouring into the gesture all the love and gratitude she felt for this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "A lifetime together," she echoed when they finally parted. "I can't think of anything more wonderful." Samuel smiled, the same smile that had first warmed her heart in a cold barn during a blizzard. "Nor can I, Faith, nor can I." In the years that followed, the Lawson Ranch grew and prospered. 2 more children joined their family, a daughter named Rose and another son called James. The cabin expanded into a proper house, with a wraparound porch where Faith would sit in the evenings, watching her children play while Samuel tended to the last of the day's chores. Horace Garrison remained a part of their lives, transformed by sobriety and the healing power of family into someone Faith barely recognized from her years under his roof. When he passed peacefully in his sleep some 10 years after that fateful blizzard, Faith mourned not the bitter man who had locked her in a barn, but the repentant uncle who had found redemption in his final years. Hot Springs grew from a small settlement into a proper town, and the Lawson family was respected within the community for their hard work and generosity. Samuel served on the town council, while Faith helped establish a small school for the children of outlying ranches. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled around their sturdy home, Faith and Samuel would sometimes share the story of how they met, of a desperate cry for help heard through a blizzard, of a barn door broken down by a stranger's strength, of two souls finding in each other exactly what they needed most. It became a family legend, passed down to their children and eventually to grandchildren. A story of rescue and redemption, of love blooming in the most unexpected circumstances. A reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, if only one has the courage to call out for help and another the compassion to answer.